In 2016, Mother Jones came out with an article about Trump's modeling agency, um, about its young, largely immigrant workforce. It was, in a way, the height of irony. A man who built his entire campaign on his hardline stance against immigrants, and all the while his business was committing full-scale immigration fraud. So the woman that wrote this piece was, the Mother Jones piece just it just disappeared. Chris Hayes did a whole segment on how Trump models seem to be borderline human trafficking. Seth Meyers came out and did a segment on the Mother Jones piece as well, comparing it to an episode of Law and Order SVU. She thought the story was going to blow up back in 2016. You know, how maybe it would even open up a long overdue dialogue about how sex trafficking and how our broken immigration and criminal justice systems enable its existence. She said, but that never happened. The story, to her astonishment, just kind of disappeared into the ether of the 24/7 news cycle. There was a Senate inquiry. Melania Trump sued a Canadian blogger and somebody else. She said it's a difficult story to write, and it's taken her hundreds of hours to slog through the research, even longer to put it together in a coherent way. So anyway, she apologizes for the length of the article, and she starts off with part 1, the ugly business of beautiful girls. The first thing you need to know about the fashion industry is that everything you see is a lie. The beautiful woman who looks up seductively from the cover of a magazine may very well only be a child. The glamorous lifestyle you imagine models living in in reality is grinding low-wage existence of long hours and slum-like living conditions which in some cases have been contractually required. The exorbitant rent charged for that squalor is then directly deducted from any wages they can garner. In some cases, the models may owe significant amounts of money to their agency, making only an average of $23,000 a year before expenses. The reality of fashion is it's an illusion by design, intended to both trick the customer into thinking they need the items being sold and to sell the lifestyle and glamour of being a model to vulnerable young girls. Once upon a time, the fashion industry was one of the few where women were at the helm. This was not surprising, given that it relies on a consumer market driven by women. So in days past, while far from perfect, fashion models were at least representative of the average woman in size, stature, and age, and their purpose was to model the clothing that women might want to buy, giving them an idea of how it might look on their own bodies. The modeling agencies of this time were headed mostly by mother hen types, like Eileen Ford, dedicated to standardized pay and curfews for their models. It was decidedly boring and unsexy. In the 1970s, though, the industry began to change. It began moving away from fashion as a utilitarian concept and into a kind of pop culture theater of costumes and performance art, all the while promoting an increasingly unattainable ideal of feminine beauty and blurring the boundaries between women and girls, exploitation, and art. There were a number of reasons behind this transformation, but one of the driving forces was sexual liberation movement and the dark side of its gains. In the words of the writer Rebecca Solnit, reflecting on her experiences as a young teen in the 70s, said the sexual revolution had deteriorated into a sort of free market, free trade ideology in which all should have access to sex and none should deny access. Pop culture was also influenced by the emergence of Playboy magazine, with its clever use of genuinely good editorial content from respected writers interspersed with pornographic images, was able to rebrand what had previously been seen as smut into something almost classy. Cloaked with the veneer of sophistication, and by publicly aligning the brand with the causes of feminism, civil rights, and free speech, Hugh Hefner was able to mainstream the objectification of female bodies in a way that had never been done before. He made porn fashionable, and it was only a matter of time before fashion embraced this approach as well. In the 70s, Playboy's brand faced competition in the similarly constructed but more explicit Penthouse magazine. Its publisher, Bob Guccione, and Hefner became engaged in a game of one-upsmanship as they competed for customers with increasingly explicit content. Playboy and Penthouse were soon joined by Hustler, which played a role in normalizing the idea of pre- and peri-pubescent girls as sexually desirable and available. It did this with its popular Barely Legal franchise, but in a more subversive way, it also did it through its comics. In fact, Dwayne Tinsley, Hustler's cartoon editor for 25 years, created one of the most popular recurring characters in the magazine, Chester the Molester, a cartoon which depicted Tinsley's character, Chester, sexually abusing prepubescent girls. In 1989, Tinsley's own daughter testified that he molested her, and he was convicted of sexually abusing his daughter, as well as having sexual contact with another 13-year-old girl, whose accusations originally led to his arrest. He continued to draw and publish his comics from prison. Write what you know, they always say. Draw what you know, huh, Tinsley? But even the sophisticated Playboy would dip its toe into the underage market. Its 1975 issue featured a now infamous set of photos shot by Gary Gross in a series titled Sugar and Spice. Brooke Shields appeared naked, sitting and standing in a bathtub, covered in oil and a full face of makeup. She was 10 years old. But even the sophisticated Playboy would... the photo shoot was part of Gross's work for a larger project, a publication called The Woman in the Child, in which he wanted to reveal the femininity of prepubescent girls by comparing them to adult women. His partner in the project was Playboy Press. In 1976, the Italian edition of Playboy featured another child pictorial, 11-year-old Eva Ionesco, as photographed by her mother, who she would later sue for profiting off her exploitation. In a twist of irony, Ionesco, who was eventually taken away from her mother by child welfare officials, was the inspiration for the 1978 film Pretty Baby. The film starred none other than Brooke Shields, then 12, as a child prostitute, complete with nude scenes. All of this, it should be noted, took place while Brooke was signed under Ford Models, who found success in marketing her as the new ideal of feminine beauty. In 1980, Brooke Shields became the youngest model to score the cover of Vogue. She was 14 years old. As one might have predicted, the commodification of young girls into sex symbols drew many into the industry with less than noble intentions. Throughout the late 70s, the industry became gradually taken over by a crowded field of playboys who liked the idea of owning a modeling agency for obvious reasons. This is when I started to notice Trump was in the late 70s, early 80s. I know why people owned modeling agencies. But there's no greater success and no single person who transformed the industry more than John Casablancas. I treated them like women, John Casablancas in the 1970s. John Casablancas was a Brooklyn-born son of wealthy Spaniards, highly educated and handsome. In the 1970s, he was a notorious playboy living in Milan when he started a relationship with his professional model. His girlfriend, whom he would eventually marry, was represented by Ford Models, the #1 agency in the world at the time. Casablancas would eventually work for the company as well as one of their talent agents in Paris. Through his work and numerous romances with models, he realized that many of the women were growing restless in the low-wage, unglamorous existence they had under the stewardship of Eileen Ford, and resented the fact that they often couldn't afford the clothes they were modeling. Ford ran her agency with an iron fist, imposing curfews and morality clauses on her models, and insisting on chaperones for photo shoots. This code of conduct and strict rules were largely informed by Ford's own experiences as a model and her understanding about how predatory the industry could be. She was committed to both protecting her models and making the industry more professional as a whole. And while Ford could be overbearing, she was also a motherly influence and brought in many of the models she represented into her home to nurture them alongside her 4 children and help them navigate the perils of a notoriously exploitative industry. Casablancas, who broke away from Ford and started Elite Model Management in 1972, by contrast, offered something different. First, he offered money, much more than models were making under Ford and similar agencies. He also offered the prospect of a more exciting lifestyle, unhindered by curfews or morality clauses, where late-night partying, drug use, and hedonistic pleasures were encouraged. While Ford and her compatriots provided the security of labor protection, such as standardized pay and working hours, Casablancas embraced the increasingly popular principles of unbridled capitalism and neoliberalism. In exchange for employment security, he gave them an opportunity to earn money commensurate with their commercial success, and the possibilities were endless. Casablancas opened Elite Model Management in 1972 with a roster of all-star talent, cementing his reputation as a top-tier agency. But within its first year, 2 of his top models were dead. The first was Paula Brenken, who mysteriously dove out a window in a drunken state the night after she told her friends that she'd been raped by a photographer. The next to die was Emmanuel Dano, who became hooked on drugs soon after signing with Elite. According to Casablancas, she was out for a late-night drive with several male friends when they attempted to rape her and fell out of a moving car while trying to fight off her attackers. He said she died instantly. I will continue this